organizers of Gulf Food, fellow industry members, members of the Switz family and friends. When the organizers invited the Switz group to talk on innovation at this venue, I thought it was an interesting idea because this exhibition is being held here in Dubai, and Dubai is definitely a very innovative city. You know, the Maktoum family, Sheikh Rashid, over 3 decades, and Sheikh Mohammed over the last 2 decades has really transformed Dubai into a global city from a backwater bay or a creek. One of the old people that I'm associated with in the Gulf tells me that in 1940-45, Sharjah was more important than Dubai. And we let alone Basra and Jeddah and Muscat and all these places. And today we know what a great city Dubai has become. Also, if you look at Gulf Food, we've been exhibiting here for the last 20 years, two decades. And it used to be one exhibition somewhere in February, March, every alternate year. Maybe 3 halls, 4 halls, 2 halls. And today we have something like 10, 12 halls twice a year. And you can't get there without innovation. So Dubai, Gulf Foods, and the Switz Group, I think, put your hands together for great innovation. A little bit about the Switz Group. I think there was some introduction, but we started from pretty humble beginnings. We had 12 employees. Our sale was a few $100,000. And we started in Saudi Arabia, in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. It was pretty hard. I don't know what prompted me to go from Bombay to Saudi Arabia, but I'm glad I did. It was again trying to do something different, trying to make sure that I have some place in the sun to be able to grow. This January 30th, I'll complete my 35th year of my landing in Saudi Arabia. We operate in 7 countries. The last one is Turkey. My partner from Turkey is here. Thank you very much. That was quite a surprise, Umar, seeing you just now. We started doing business just about a year back. We manufacture bakery ingredients there. We are also a very bakery focused group. We don't really do anything else but bakery. But we also straddle the value chain. Unlike other bakeries which concentrate on one aspect, we are into ingredients, we are into industrial bakeries, and we have a pretty strong presence in retail bakeries in 4 countries too. So we gather insights from ingredients and retail bakeries to strengthen our industrial bakeries and prevent commoditization there. And it's a kind of a model in itself of business that promotes learning. Coming to innovation, when we think of innovation, our thinking kind of gravitates towards the fact that we think of a product like an iPhone or a drug or a pharmaceutical, something tangible. It's pretty hard to think of innovation as a process or as a way of thinking or as a way of an organization. And I'd like to put before you here that there is an innovative culture in our group. A lot of people have remarked that you have a very innovative culture. And when I was invited to speak over here on innovation, I said, that's very interesting because it will help me to think through this DNA that we have, which a lot of people from the outside seem to feel that we have a very innovative culture. And how does this innovation or innovative culture come to be? So through the process of preparing for this talk that's there, it forced me to kind of think through what we do and how we do things. And I think one of the things that came to my mind was that We have a set of values which we have practiced for many decades, that we formalized it, we communicated it, and over the years I think we have internalized it in all the group companies. The first one is that of family. Family is a very basic aspect of human life. All of us come from families. We have seen families around us. We know intuitively what a family is. You know, there is shared learning, there is change. The old become super old and incompetent. The young become, so there is rotational leadership, there is all kinds of things that happen in a family. And we intuitively understand that. Also, family is quite spread out. You have the close family, your brothers, sisters, parents. You have extended family. Then you have pseudo families like neighbors and friends and colleagues. So there is a concept of family that we have tried to incorporate in our group, which is that we have a shared livelihood, and that is our family. We are not tied. We don't have ties of blood or geography necessarily, or of race or ethnicity or language or religion. But we have a commonality of shared livelihood. And this livelihood that is there extends not only to the employees and shareholders, but also to our suppliers, to our service providers, and even to our competitors, because together we create the ecosystem that enables our categories to thrive and prosper. And we have tried to keep that competition, cooperation kind of thought alive everywhere. The second is teamwork. We all know what is teamwork. One of the things we actively discourage in our company is prima donnas and people who become stars. You know, behind every star, there is a hard-working team that enables them to succeed. And we try and consciously tell that. So, I'm very, very proud and humbly proud to lead a team of excellent people that's there. So teamwork is the heart of every great enterprise, and that's our second value system. And the third one is that one of the major jobs of leaders and leadership is to create learning organizations. Things change, markets change, consumer habits evolve, competition becomes suddenly very strong or disappears. People from other industries come into your space, and especially in food, in the share of the stomach, you have restaurants coming into the bakery side and all kinds of things. And as organizations grow with time, they need to evolve and they need to learn. And leaders don't have the insight, the knowledge to necessarily guide them. The organization's DNA itself must be that of learning. And leadership must create that culture to keep learning. And that's the third of our principle. That a primary responsibility of leaders is to create learning organizations. And the fourth is execution, which I think everybody is very familiar with. Without executing a good strategy, the strategy is useless. It's no use having a great culture or great bonhomie in an organization when it does not produce financial results. Because after all, we are an economic family with shared livelihood. So if the basic purpose of creating value doesn't exist, it's pointless. I'd like to talk of 4 innovations, case studies of 4 innovations that over the last 2 decades that have been part of the Switz Group. The first one is of creating a category. Not too many people or companies can claim to have created categories. Rondo might have been an exception. In Switzerland, maybe a few years back when they created the sheeting category. But very, very few companies create categories. And I think that we have created a category. And that is the samosa wrapper. Samosa was an integral part of Ramadan in Saudi Arabia. The restaurants and the bakeries used to kind of close down their businesses because of fasting. They had nothing much to do, so they would make this samosa wrapper. And the women in the household would fill it up with their things and became a Ramzan special. But it was largely unorganized, it was a neighborhood thing, it had very low shelf life, it was not standardized. And most importantly, when the main demand was there just before Ramadan, there was nobody supplying that because the restaurants were still working and they didn't have the manpower to supply. So as a result, there was a shortage. So into this kind of a niche or a need, we waded in, and we've created a category which today in our company is about a $25 million category. We are quite transparent with our numbers, you know. I'm sure some of the people here might be our competitors also, but they are welcome. So really, we've created one really great category. It's one of our most profitable categories. Ramadan used to be a month where you used to lose money. Our salesmen were unhappy because they didn't get proper commissions. Our production guys were unhappy because they didn't get overtime. And from that, it has become our most profitable month, and maybe a third to a quarter of our annual profits comes from this one month. I want to, can you just play the TVC? I want to show an ad here that we did that also kind of, can we have the advertising? Yeah. Yeah. We have focused on the woman, the mother.
أهم ما يقدم كذلك في وجبة الإفطار حب الأم.
Mother's love is part of every iftar. It's a very unusual ad.
Swiss ترحب بكم في رمضان.
It just shows the samosa wrapper, which is our product, and envelops it in the mother, who's a central figure in every Ramadan. Because, you know, her. So we have tried to identify our product, tried to give it a character, which is very much Ramadan focused. Even now, about 80% of our annual sales come in this one month. The values that are at play here are corporate values. You can see that teamwork played a very important role. I'd like to actually confess that I had nothing to do with this product. There was a salesman by the name of Molai, very entrepreneurial guy. He was very unhappy about having no sales in this month, so he suggested we make this product. He took us to a bakery that was making it, and he said it's very simple to make it. The manager who was running the business wanted to give it a try because there was nothing to lose. So over my objection saying that this is not a bakery product, he did it, he tried it. It was really messy. We were doing it the Yamani way. So the production manager was not happy having all this oil and all this stuff in this factory. He tried to figure out how it could be made with the existing equipment in a manner that was, you know, more standardized. And he produced a product that was different, but it was a big hit. And then Satish, the manager who followed Arnab, came in and he took it to the next level. And today we have a product that's really, you know, where we have created a category, and with advertising support every year, it's become so important that if retailers don't keep this product, customers really abuse them. So this is the first innovation that I think this was an innovation, and I think I wanted to talk about that. The second innovation that I want to talk about is brand migration. A little over a decade back, we bought a business, a cake and rusk business from Savola. It was part of a brand name called Tasali, which was also bought by PepsiCo, the chips part of it. And the funny aspect of this transaction was that we had to vacate the name in 2 years, which was sold to PepsiCo. So we had a business that had market leadership in both the cake and rusk category in that format, but no brand in 18 months. So we had to migrate the brand out. We consulted some advertising hotshots, and they were suggesting a lot of money to change brands, and suggesting methods and ways by which, we would basically have both the brands, one getting bigger and the other getting smaller over a period of time, and things of that sort, which did not appeal to our sense of integrity. The cake category that was there, we had almost 95% market share, but it was relatively medium margin. But the rusk was the troublesome one, because we are number 2 in that category, but it was very profitable and had 2/3 of our business. So we had this unusual problem of changing the brand name of 2 products, quite dissimilar, and both of them having pretty large market shares. In fact, it was so daunting that none of the other people who looked at buying the business even considered buying it. Like fools go where angels fear to tread, so it was that kind of a thing. We had bought that business, and the CEO who was in charge of the business was so stressed out that he just didn't know how to handle it. I'd like to just throw the question open to you. What would you have done? Well, what we did was something out of the box. Instead of changing the brand name from one name to another, we decided to change it from one name to 2 names, and thereby complicating the problem even further. We realized that the cake category, where we had 95% market share, really wouldn't go anywhere because there was nobody else. The main problem was the rusk problem. So we concentrated our communication strategy on changing rusk. So we had 2 brand names, one Nahu, which is like honey, or which the Arabic word Nahla, means bee, so it has some connotation to honey, which is very suitable for the cake name and had an association with children because of a cartoon. And for the rusk, we gave the brand name called Garamish, which in Hijazi dialect means something like crunchy. So it was very suitable for the rusk thing, which was more of an adult snack. Our advertising agency, when we kept probing them for more and more ethical ways of communicating, they came up with a brilliant idea. I'd just like you to play that one, please. There's another TV scene which shows how we did the brand.
السلام عليكم. أنا عصام
This is the CEO.
رئيس مجلس الإدارة. لما اشترينا مصنع شابورة تسالي، احتفظنا بحق استخدام الاسم لمدة 2 وانتهت المدة، وعشان كده غيرنا الاسم من شابورة تسالي لشابورة قراميش، بس الطعم بقي على حاله. نشكركم على ثقتكم الدائمة فينا.
أصبح اسم شابورة تسالي شابورة قراميش. وحدة الاسم تغير، لكن الطعم الرائع لم يتغير.
It's an information, it's not a commercial. We're just informing the public that, we have to change the brand name. We're sorry, it's the same product. This is the guy who makes it. He assures you that it's the same recipe, it's the same factory, it's the same people. Sorry, we have to change the name. No, total integrity. We did it in less than 100,000 Saudi riyals, about less than $30,000. So, it was brilliant. Today, the results of this brand migration, we have roughly 5x sales over the last 10-12 years as compared to what we had when we bought the business. We have a market share of 50% as compared to 30% for us. Our next competitor is down to 15%. We are still market leaders of the cake category that's there. And these 2 have become major pillars of our industrial bakery in Saudi Arabia. As far as the values that were there, which contributed to Garamish, the Tasali brand chain success, Adil, my son, He was, I think, all of 21 or 22 and based in Jeddah at that time. The CEO who you saw was so stressed out that he did not know what was happening. So I just told Adil, I said, I thought he had a flair for marketing. I said, you just take over this whole thing, handle the brand change, because none of us know how to change a brand. So you are on level playing field. So at least you don't have the fear that we have. So he executed this campaign brilliantly. So one of the values that I would like to point out is about execution and also about rotational leadership, where we had a 21, 22-year-old guy given charge of one of the most critical aspects of our business. The third innovation that I want to talk about is how we have converted commodity into a specialty. Most of you who understand the bakery business, they know that bakeries have basically 4 commodities: flour, sugar, fat, and eggs. Most bakeries, even today, will buy eggs. They will crack it in their bakery and use it. It's a commodity. They buy it on price, maybe a little bit on freshness, maybe clean, maybe large size, but essentially it's a price-driven commodity. We noticed that there were some customers that were quite keen on making sure that it was very safe, and they wanted pasteurized eggs. So this was our ingredients business that was only involved in the trading of products. They used to import products and sell it. So we started importing pasteurized eggs for some of the companies that are fire kitchens that need to have very safe eggs. And then it struck us as, why don't we kind of pasteurize it here itself? So we hired somebody who understood the business. We bought this pasteurizer, we put it out there, and it was expensive. It used to cost about 25-30% more than the fresh eggs, and for many years we lost money. We continued, persevered. We unitized it, we added a blast freezer, we added Elopack, we added a large number of things, and then suddenly we had a bit of luck. There was bird flu in many parts of the world, and cheap eggs from India stopped coming. And suddenly we started making money because we were able to get people to. So sometimes innovations need a bit of luck to succeed also. So today this business contributes substantially to our ingredients business. It's become quite a strong pillar. We have expanded. We do that business in the Philippines, and we are right now looking at bidding for an acquisition in Europe. It has become one of the major pillars of our business and a new vertical. The values that came into play here was learning, because from the trading business we understood about pasteurized egg and the need for pasteurized egg. From pasteurized egg we looked at trying to do it in-house here. We didn't succeed very much. We saw that there were customers who would pay a larger price for unitization. Very small customers like hotels. They would buy only 100, 200 liters a month. We catered to that market, and today we get high margins from hotels and very low margins from larger customers like airports and other things. And together we have a pretty high volume and a pretty decent margin business. So what used to be a commodity is now a specialty. It actually gives us very good margins as a whole business. The values that came to play here were learning and flawless execution. And I'd really like to hold up 2 of my colleagues here, Ronnie and Deendayal, for really a flawless execution of a very complex technology, a very high safety standards and hazardous material, and to put it up on a world standard here in this country. The last innovation I'd like to talk about is sliced bread. Most of us understand that sliced bread is one of the most boring products in the bakery business. You don't really think twice about buying sliced bread. Whichever is available, you just squeeze it a little bit, make sure it's fresh, and you buy it. So distribution counts a lot, availability counts a lot. In some markets, price counts a lot. But in Saudi Arabia, this was a very profitable segment because flour is subsidized. And we were not in that market. And one of our major competitors had already gathered 70% of the market share. That is Luzin Bakery. So we wanted to get into that market, but we just didn't know how. Our distribution system was once a week, while our competitors had a daily or an alternate day distribution system. So our distribution system was against us. We didn't have an idea as to how to really enter this market. And my son really wanted to get into this market desperately. And I was discouraging him all the time. So finally he caught hold of somebody. Are you here? Olivier? No. I think he's next door. So Olivier from Mecatherm, and they put together a project. Quite a complex project. I think the technology was used for the first time in this part of the world, if not, a 30-day shelf life bread. He fortified it with milk, so added another dimension of value. Got 2 packs in it. One was a 4-slice pack, and the other was got thicker slices. So really kind of differentiated the product in an area that I thought there was no hope of penetrating it. Through innovative thought processes, he persuaded me to make the largest capex investment in our history. I think it was about 5 or 6 million euros. And I can't say that it's a rousing success today, but I think it's well on its way to be the next pillar of our innovation. So again, great execution, young leadership, disregarded what the owner wanted to do, kept at it, persuaded, and that's there. I'd like to summarize. I have talked of 4 innovations. One of creating a category, one of creating a new product in an existing category, one of changing a commodity to a specialty, that was the egg processing, and the other one how to migrate a brand into 2 brands, and all of them relatively successful. But we have done many things that have not succeeded. And innovation is about success as well as failure. It's the ability to accept failure that allows you and allows the organization the courage to succeed and to try new things. And unless you try new things, you never succeed. And 2 of the innovations have actually happened in spite of my objections. And I'm very proud to say that today. One of the things that helps us to do that is that we are financially a very strong company. We are quite conservative in our financial models. We have a very low debt, maybe 0.4, 0.5. We are very profitable. Our EBITDAs are in the mid 15, 20% kind of range. We have good cash flows. All this is pretty much important if you have to innovate, because you have to pay for the mistakes that don't work out. And finally, you also need a bit of luck. We had bird flu happening. We had other pieces of luck which I have not mentioned. In the samosa thing that is there was the Iraq war, which resulted in the Yemenis supporting Saddam Hussein, which made the Saudis throw them out of the country. And a lot of people who were making samosas the traditional way simply disappeared. So, a bit of luck, a bit of doing new things, the ability to absorb losses. This is the way of innovation. Thank you very much.
insights. It's always wonderful to have a case study with successes and failures, and also a case study that shows that young people can actually lead. Nice. Can we have some questions? Please raise your hand and state the name of your organization. Rami.
I guess I don't have to introduce myself. My name is Rami Radi from Dubai Exports. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. My question is for the sort of SMEs that make up most of, I mean, you're not even a large, you're a humongous company. For the SMEs, what can they do to innovate, or how can they, when we talk about innovation, you know, there's marginal innovation that can be done with packaging and other sort of smaller things, but how can an SME innovate and perhaps leverage the fact that it's an SME and it's perhaps more nimble even? What recommendations or suggestions do you have for them?
Most of our innovations have happened when we were relatively small. We are today about $225, $250 million. But a large part of our innovation happened at the $30, $40 million range. 50. So I don't think you have to be big to innovate. It's just that the kind of risks that you take are different. So for example, we couldn't have taken the risk of the bread plant when we were at 50 million, but we could take the bread plant risk at 200 million. So it's the extent of risks that are there. So innovation comes from the ability to think differently and the courage to be able to follow what you believe rather than following the beaten path of others. So I don't think innovation has a limitation of size. In fact, the smaller you are, the more the tendency to innovate, because necessity demands that.
So can I just ask a follow-up question? What sort of innovation culture do you cultivate in your organization so that you have such developments as this?
The culture, I thought that's how I started actually, but maybe I was not so clear about it. It's the value systems that we have in the company that's there, which promote learning, which allow people outside the hierarchy to actually lead and give ideas and push their ideas through. And by celebrating, for example, I'm using this occasion today to actually celebrate the fact that two of the greatest successes of my organization were over my objection. That encourages people to not get to not accept a no from me if they truly believe in an idea, and to keep pushing it.
Any other questions? Do we have any other questions? No? In that case, it leaves me just to thank you for a wonderful presentation and a great series of innovations. Thank you.